The beeping of the heart monitor was the first sound I noticed when I woke, sharp and insistent, like a warning I had ignored my whole life. The sterile smell of the ICU hit me immediately, antiseptic metal, and something faintly sweet, like the ghost of flowers. I blinked against the harsh overhead light and tried to lift my arm, only to feel the weight of tubes and wires tethering me to life itself. And then I realized I was alone. Not a single familiar face lingered in the room. My parents, who had always claimed I was their pride and joy, were nowhere to be found. My sister's suitcase sat in the corner, the expensive leather glinting under the hospital lights. A note from the nurse, casually pinned to the clipboard, read, "They left early this morning. Trip planned months ago. Sorry, sweetie. You're safe now." Safe. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I tried to speak, but the sound that emerged was a hoarse whisper. They left me. A memory flashed, unbidden. Birthday after birthday. Family dinners where my accomplishments were barely acknowledged, while my sister's smallest achievements were celebrated like national holidays. The favoritism had been obvious to me, even as a child. But I had hoped for a moment like this. Sickness should have brought them closer, shouldn't it? Instead, they chose her vacation over my life. The nurse noticed my gaze lingering on the suitcase. "It's not personal," she said gently, though I could feel the doubt behind her words. "They just value her differently." Differently. Yes, that was the word. My chest tightened, the anger and hurt colliding, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to scream, to demand why my life had always seemed secondary, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I was powerless, tethered to a bed that had become a cage. Then my eyes fell on the visitor log lying on the table beside me. A simple leather-bound book, filled with neat signatures and brief notes. I flipped it open, curiosity prickling through the pain. There, in my mother's precise handwriting, were names and dates spanning decades. But something felt off, odd dates, scribbles in corners, and entries that didn't match up with what I remembered. A cold knot of realization twisted in my stomach. This log wasn't just a record, it was a history I hadn't been allowed to see. Each signature, each note, seemed like a breadcrumb trail to a truth that had been deliberately hidden from me. I stared at the page, rage and despair mingling into a strange clarity. My parents had abandoned me before, in ways smaller but just as painful. But this, leaving me in the ICU for my sister's trip, was the ultimate betrayal. Somewhere deep inside, a fire ignited. The helplessness, the humiliation, the years of neglect, all of it began to fuel something darker. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I would find the truth, and when I did, they would see the consequences of choosing her over me. The leather-bound visitor log felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of decades of secrets. I traced my fingers over the neat columns of names and dates, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My parents' names were there, of course, every visit, every hour they supposedly spent by my side. Yet, a careful look revealed inconsistencies that made my stomach twist. Some dates didn't align with memories I had of my childhood. Some signatures, though clearly theirs, were scribbled in haste, almost like they were trying to hide something. And then there was the oddest thing: entries. For a sister I didn't remember. A sister I had never met, but whose visits seemed to be meticulously recorded for over 3 decades. I leaned closer, scanning the pages. My pulse quickened as I read a note in the corner of one entry. "She is too young to understand, must keep her away." The words were faint, almost illegible, but their meaning hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents hadn't just neglected me, they had been hiding someone else. a child whose very existence had been erased from family memory. And worse, it seemed that I had been kept in the dark about the truth my entire life. Memories started flooding back. The whispered phone calls in another room, the sudden trips my parents took without explanation, the way my sister was always allowed privileges I was denied. It had all been staged, a careful construction of a reality where I was secondary, expendable. I felt a cold fury seep into my veins. The injustice of it, the betrayal of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, was suffocating. My parents had literally abandoned me in my darkest hour, and now I was seeing the evidence of how long their deception had been going on. I spent hours flipping through the log, piecing together fragments of a life that had been deliberately hidden. There were entries I couldn't interpret, codes and shorthand that I didn't understand. But even without knowing every detail, I could see a pattern: favoritism, secrecy, manipulation, and, most painful of all, indifference to my suffering. A plan began forming in the shadows of my mind. This wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore. It was about reclaiming the power that had been stolen from me. The anger, once pure and raw, began to sharpen into something more precise: determination. For the first time in years, I felt alive, not just surviving, but plotting. I would unravel every secret they had buried, expose the lies, and make them understand, in ways they could never ignore, the consequences of their betrayal. The visitor log had become my guide, my map through the treacherous history my parents had tried to erase. And as I closed it gently and placed it back on the bedside table, I whispered to myself, barely audible over the hum of the ICU machines. You thought I was powerless. You thought I would forget. But I see now, and I will not forgive. Not yet. First, I will make you pay, not with fists, but with the truth. And in that moment, lying in the quiet room, the embers of vengeance took root, small but unstoppable, promising a reckoning that my parents, and everyone who had hidden the truth, would never forget. Even as my body ached from the ICU, I couldn't rest. The visitor log had cracked open a door I could no longer ignore. Every night, as the hospital grew quiet and the rhythmic beeping of the machines became a lullaby of sorts, I would stare at the ceiling and replay the entries in my mind. Something hidden, something long buried, had been living in the shadows of my family's life, and I was determined to bring it into the light. The first step was research. My weak fingers tapped at a borrowed tablet, combing through old hospital records, school registrations, and faded family photos. Each discovery was like a match lighting the darkness. Birth certificates didn't align. There were gaps in medical histories, names that appeared and vanished without explanation. And slowly, a horrifying pattern emerged. My parents had a child 32 years ago. A sister who had been erased from every official record. My breath caught as I pieced together the fragments. My so-called favorite sister, the one whose trips had mattered more than my survival, was a manufactured figure, a carefully constructed illusion designed to replace the original. I had been forced into the shadow of a lie that had begun before I even drew my first breath. The implications were staggering. Every luxury my sister had been afforded, every word of praise she received, every indulgence, had been a deliberate attempt to distract attention from the family secret. My parents had not only abandoned me in the ICU, they had spent a lifetime ensuring I never discovered the truth. Old diaries, hidden in a forgotten drawer I had found during a family visit, revealed even darker details. My parents' guilt, their panic over discovery, their quiet manipulation of relatives and neighbors to maintain appearances. It was all written in cramped, guilt-ridden handwriting. They had been terrified someone would find out about the child they had erased, the child who had become invisible to the world. I felt tears stinging my eyes, but anger was stronger than grief. How many moments of my life had been stolen? How many times had I cried silently, ignored, belittled, pushed aside, while they celebrated a fabricated reality? And then the thought came, sharp and clear revenge. Not blind, not vengeful for the sake of destruction, but precise, measured, and sweet. I would expose them, piece by piece, until the facade they had built crumbled. Their shame would be public. Their pride would burn. The social masks they wore would shatter, leaving nothing but the hollow core of deceit they had nurtured for decades. But first, I had to learn everything. Names, dates, hidden accounts, letters, and private meetings. Every detail mattered. Every memory, every signature in that visitor log, became a clue in a growing puzzle. And as I traced the arc of their betrayals across 32 years, I realized something profound. I was no longer a helpless child. I was no longer the victim they had counted on me being. I was a force they could not contain. The day came like any other, yet it carried the weight of decades. My parents had invited the entire extended family for a celebration, my sister's achievement, as they called it. They were proud, smug, confident in their constructed world, where I was merely a shadow. But I arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, carrying the visitor log and a folder of secrets that would unravel everything they thought they controlled. The gathering was filled with laughter and champagne, the clinking of glasses masking the tension that had been building inside me for years. My parents greeted me with forced smiles, their eyes flicking nervously, sensing perhaps a storm they could not name. My sister waved at me, unaware that her entire life, the luxury, the attention, the privileges, was built on a lie that was about to be exposed. I started subtly. A comment here, a question there, a reference to an event no one else remembered. My parents stiffened, glancing at each other, unease creeping into their smiles. Then, carefully, I opened the visitor log. Pages filled with dates, names, and cryptic notes were displayed for anyone willing to look. Eyes widened as relatives noticed entries that made no sense, notes about a sister none of them had ever met. A child erased from the family for 32 years. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. My parents tried to speak, to laugh it off, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. I revealed hospital records, old diaries, and letters that traced decades of manipulation and favoritism. My sister's eyes filled with confusion and hurt as she realized the life she had been living was a carefully staged performance. "You see," I said, my voice steady and clear, "all these years, I was invisible. All these years, my life was secondary. And yet, I survived. I grew stronger, I learned the truth. And now, so does everyone else." The room was silent. My parents cried, crumbling under the gaze of relatives who finally understood the depth of their deception. My sister, trembling, looked at them, the trust she had once held replaced by betrayal and sorrow. My parents' faces, once shields of authority and control, were raw with shame. But I did not yell. I did not attack. I let the truth speak for itself. Every lie, every act of abandonment, every moment they had chosen her over me, they felt it all in the silent judgment of those around them. The fire that had burned in my chest now radiated outward, not with vengeance, but with clarity and justice. When I finally stepped away, I felt lighter. The pain, the neglect, the betrayal, transformed into a power that no money, no favoritism, no fabricated reality could ever take from me. My parents and sister were left to reckon with the consequences of their actions, and I walked out of that room, not as the child they abandoned, but as the master of my own story. Outside, The sun was warm on my face. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight lift. I had survived, I had uncovered the truth, and I had claimed my life back. Their secrets had been exposed, and the world now knew the reality they had tried to hide. And for the first time in decades, I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of freedom. I was no longer a victim. I was unstoppable.